Well, good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dave Greenfield. I'm the Director of Technology Evangelism at Cato Networks, and we're here to talk about don't renew your SD-WAN contract before watching this webinar. Some practical tips about life and liberty after SD-WAN. Joining me today is the great Roy Chua. Good morning, Roy.
Yeah, good morning, Dave. Pleasure to
I
be
say
here.
Roy is great because he's the founder and principal at AvidThink, which means actually he's been tracking SD-WAN before there's SD-WAN. AvidThink used to be SDX Central Research, and today he does SASE strategy work for enterprises, carriers, and hyperscalers around the world. And he's here to share with us today some lessons that you folks may be able to take away as you look for life beyond SD-WAN. Just a few housekeeping rules before I turn it over to Roy to get us going. Um, I think it's on the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a Q&A box. At any time you have any questions, just drop it a question, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session, and we'll be able to address it there. Any questions that aren't addressed, we'll get back to you afterwards with an answer. And also throughout the course of this presentation, there are going to be polls. I ask you just to take a few seconds and give us your answers. They really do help us a lot in bringing you this content and improving this content for the future. And with that, I am going to turn it over to the great Roy Chua.
I don't know a great Dave, but I'll get it started anyhow. So, as you were saying, there was life before SD-WAN and there is life after SD-WAN. And in many cases, what we're seeing, given that it's been a couple of years since SD-WAN came on the scene, that many enterprises are up for SD-WAN renewal. And so the question there is, what do I do, right? And this is what we're going to talk about. So if everything's going great, everything's not changing, everyone's happy, and you love your SD-WAN provider, great, stick with the SD-WAN provider. But for most companies, it's in terms of what they're looking at, there is an SD-WAN reevaluation that it is happening. And it's triggered by multiple factors of, some of we list here. These are the top ones that we hear about. In some cases, the SD-WAN solution that they had didn't have the global reach that they were looking for. So, no POPs in the country that you're looking for, points of presence. That's what POPs are. In some cases, because of, driven by the pandemic, what they realized was they needed more scalability and better security at the edge, and the SD-WAN pure connectivity based solutions that maybe they picked the first time round didn't do that. In other cases, it's not so much just work from home, but work from anywhere. And the SD-WAN solution that they picked originally didn't quite have the mobility support, the mobile support that they were looking for. And certainly, as I said, in some cases it's security driven. And so the companies realized that they needed stronger security in their SD-WAN stack where they had only strong networking in that situation. Some other reasons that we hear about, or when we talk to the enterprises in terms of their, reevaluation, is they're looking for better cloud connectivity. The reality is that a lot of enterprises today use cloud, and they need a solution that can reach into the cloud, your VPCs, your virtual private clouds, in public clouds, or even in private clouds, to try to connect those workloads to the users. In other cases, what we found is that they had cobbled together a solution stack, with multiple security elements and networking elements, and they're trying to make it work. And that architectural stack to maintain has been complex. Maybe it met their needs, but they're looking to streamline and collapse that in a more manageable solution. Yet others are looking for faster onboarding because they're bringing on a large contracted partner. They've realized that outsourcing is important. And they need to onboard a lot of people quickly, and the SD-WAN solution can't quite do that. Or there's a supply chain problem and they can't get all the units that they want, and they need flexibility for a software-based solution and a hardware-based solution, right? And mix that up, and not quite there. Likewise, same with M&A. You got to quickly onboard a organization or bring two organizations together, and they're like, wait, my SD-WAN doesn't quite do that for me. I need a better solution. And so these are just some of the top reasons that we hear, but there is revaluation going on given that we're a couple of years in now into the SD-WAN evolution.
So it's not that SD-WAN as a technology is outdated. I mean, we might say that about MPLS. It actually, it sounds like, SD-WAN does serve a certain core need that enterprises have today. But there just are other use cases and other uses that are not being addressed by pure SD-WAN alone.
That is correct. And I think, in some cases you can say, well, maybe, the definition of SD-WAN was a little murky to begin with. And so depending on the flavor that you got, depending on when you got it, and depending on the vendor you got it from, it might not meet your needs completely. And you are correct. The needs themselves are evolving.
It was really thought of as a replacement for MPLS and carrier services. You look at the original ONUG white paper, where they where they detail what what SD-WAN would look like, and it was very much, hey, we've got a problem with our carrier services, we need a replacement for that. And a lot of the things that we're talking about here, well beyond scope. They never thought about people.
Oh yes.
They thought about people working at home en masse. That
is correct. That is correct. It is a different world, and the needs have changed, right? That's right. And so it's. In many cases, maybe it works, but in many cases, what we're seeing is it doesn't quite work anymore, right? So
well, it works. Time. It just doesn't work for all cases.
That's for their need. That's correct.
For everything,
yes.
So, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you, Roy. So just a quick poll question for you guys. How long have you been with your current SD-WAN vendor? If you can just give us a few seconds on this, we would appreciate it. So less than 1 year, 1 to 3 years, 4 to 5 years, or 5+ years. I'll count that down, 4, 3, 2, 1 seconds. Thank you for your answers. 5+ years, that's a long time.
It is a long time. That you would have bought in right at the very beginning.
The very beginning, that's
yes.
right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yep.
All right, and one other question for you folks. Which the following best describes why your company purchased your current SD-WAN solution? Was it because it helped you reduce bandwidth costs? Was it for improved agility, quick site deployments, better network visibility maybe, or co-management, or something else, others? So just pick one of those, the best one that you feel that the one that you feel that best reflects your organization's needs and why you chose SD-WAN. Super. All right. Good. Well, let me turn it back to you, Roy.
Well, thank you, Dave. And so, so maybe you say, I'm up for renewal, but it's not so straightforward. There's multiple players in the space right now. So what do I do? Well, you have a couple of options, right? So first, before we get there, I think we need to recognize that there have been changes since probably your last SD-WAN deployment, right? Depending on when it was. Maybe it was 5+ years, right? I think one of the key things that we're seeing is that the cloud has risen in importance, right? So there was cloud before. It's not that the clouds weren't there before, but I think increasingly what we're seeing, especially with very large enterprises or even mid-sized enterprises, the cloud has become very important to their IT strategy. And what do I mean by that? Well, what we're seeing is a shift in workloads. In the topology used to be some IT locally, some in the cloud, but a lot of that has migrated to the cloud. And whether you're talking about public cloud or hybrid cloud, it is shifting to the cloud. I think that's one. And so why is it shifting to the cloud? What we're seeing is that that there are operational benefits to going to the cloud. And likewise, what a lot of enterprises realize is that the benefits of the cloud are operational as well. It's not just the application workloads, but it's things like security, it's things like even networking. I mean, they talk about NAS, right? Networking as a service, right? There are advantages to using the cloud for many of these services. It's not 100% obviously, but it's a big percentage of it. And so leveraging scale economies, generally speaking, in the clouds, is beneficial, right? A vendor that's using the cloud, can amortize the cost of R&D over many clients, many POPs, right? The scale economies in using the cloud to deliver infrastructure, not just computing, but networking and security as well. And obviously operational benefits using the cloud or having the vendor do it as a service. And then finally, what we're seeing is that there's difficulty in hiring. Maybe you have experienced it, maybe you haven't. A lot of our clients have. And your IT staff are getting overwhelmed. I mean, that's just the reality. And so security too is getting harder to track. All those CVEs, all those vulnerabilities, right? How do you track those? And so the same reason why the cloud had the draw for taking your computing workloads, we're seeing that the cloud is important for taking your networking and security workloads as well. And so that's a big factor. And so given the importance of the cloud, what are we seeing in this SD-WAN landscape? Well, there's a new acronym, which you if haven't heard by now, Well, it's very unlikely you haven't heard it by now because everyone's talking SASE, right? I mean, I think, yeah.
Okay, but we'll give it to you. We'll give it to you, Roy.
Yeah, I know. Look, but so, secure access service edge, right? It's a term that was coined by Gartner, right? And so certainly had prominent already at birth. So what's SASE, right? SASE, in our view, is a combination of networking and security powered by the cloud, right? That's where the cloud comes in. And it's basically to provide you with the network as a service component, of which SD-WAN is one of those, right? Certainly. And the other elements are a lot of networking security, especially enterprise edge security,
Right.
bundle under one umbrella, so to speak, right? And so this concept of network and security as a service combined, it's kind of like peanut butter and jelly. Maybe an American thing. I thought it was kind of weird the first time, but it actually tastes pretty good. So I got to say, it's a pretty good concept. Peanut butter and jelly, and obviously, and SASE too is a really good concept. And certainly, given the uptake in enterprise in terms of what people are saying, in terms of what they say they want, SASE is important, right? That cloud-powered security model.
And that's a really interesting point because we actually have had security networking integration before. We called them UTMs, right? Or security integration, at least.
That's right, we did.
But because that was unified threat management, because that was running on appliances and not the cloud, didn't scale very well. Every time you turned on a new function, you had to think about whether or not you're going to have to, scale up your appliance, add more resources. And
exactly.
Like you said, the nice thing about shifting everything into the cloud is that, scaling is an issue. I mean, if you do it right.
That's right. That's right. No, absolutely right. And
it's universally available. It's not just available just for that site, but it's available for any place that's connecting into that.
That's correct. If you implement it correctly, it is available across all your locations that you need the service at in a reasonably performant manner, right? So that's a great concept, this whole SASE thing.
Right. The reality might be different, but that's the concept, right?
Well, yeah, speaking of reality, right? So this was rolled out, people are like, oh, it's awesome, SASE. And then what Gartner said originally was that, hey, wait, very few vendors qualify. In fact, maybe no vendors qualify for the whole thing to begin with. And they were like, wait, what did you just say? So what came along was the realization that sometimes people didn't need the whole thing. Maybe they didn't want peanut butter and jelly, at one time, and so they said, "What if you just like peanut butter? As long as you're not allergic, it's good, right?" So the concept was modified to include SSE. So the cloud-based security elements were put under the umbrella of SSE, or Secure Services Edge, which was primarily just a focus on enterprise edge security. And so you see some of those functions that the enterprises say, hey, really all we need is just this thing, or maybe we got SD-WAN, but we just need some security in the cloud. What do we do? Well, what do we call it? We call it SSE. And so what we're seeing as well in the marketplace, from an enterprise standpoint, is an option that we have now an SSE class of vendors that can provide you just the edge security from the cloud in an easy to consume manner. And so now you have options. You can say, hey, I can do my SD-WAN thing. I can go SASE, right? Or I can just go ahead. And so, there are multiple paths that we could take going forward. So certainly, one is there's option 0 always, or option before A, whatever that is, which is, hey, stick with the SD-WAN vendor because everything's good. And that's a possibility too. But maybe you just want to switch to another SDN vendor. That's one option. Or SSE is cool, so maybe my SD-WAN is kind of working, but I need more security, so SSE. Or maybe I switch SD-WAN vendor and I pick up a different SSE vendor at the same time, or I just go whole hog, right? It's time for SASE. So we can explore some of these things in more detail and see what each of those entails. So
thank you, Roy. But before we do that, of course, we've got a question for you folks. Do your networking and security teams always purchase networking and security solutions together? Sometimes purchase networking and security solutions together, or never purchase networking and security solutions together? So you can just take a second and answer it. I love answering this question, by the way. This is a question I would love posing this question to clients and customers, as we speak, because it really sort of captures the, depending on the organization, sometimes you've got in the kind of the profiles of the people in the room, sometimes they kind of look at each other, right? With those,
Oh, yeah.
kind of glaring at each other like, oh no, they never purchase things together.
Yeah, in fact,
Sometimes like, yeah, sure,
yeah.
of course.
Oh, no, that's true. I mean, in fact, there are some situations where if they purchase that, I'm not going to purchase that. I'm going to do the other thing, right? So,
Right.
yes, organizational. So, it does depend, and it is
Okay.
important. And this question is very pertinent because it does potentially impact the options you have available. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So over to your first approach, switch to another SD-WAN vendor.
Yeah, and so maybe you like SD-WAN, and it works just fine, but you just need an improved version of SD-WAN. You're looking for maybe someone with better global POPs, more points of presence to cover the organization, or maybe you started as DIY because you were gung ho and you knew you could do it and you did it. And now you're like, wait a minute, maybe I need a managed service because, again, right, offloading as a service, right, using the cloud, good things, right? And in your situation, perhaps the security infrastructure that you have is just fine, or like Dave just asked in the poll question, right? Maybe you have no control over it, right? And you're like,
Right.
it's not my decision, it's someone else's. So let me just focus on making my SD-WAN the best SD-WAN.
Right.
Now,
Oh,
so
sorry,
yeah, go
didn't
no,
mean to
go ahead.
jump your gun
No,
there.
no, no. I was going to say, but there are issues with going that route, right? It's if you do the upgrade without laying a foundation, because we know networking and security converging. I mean, not all organizations are there yet, but certainly is a direction that we're seeing. And so if you don't coordinate these kinds of networking and security upgrades, you can leave holes in infrastructure, and you might just be switching, one pane for another down the road, and that's all you're doing. But again, so just be aware that that's the case. Yeah. Go ahead,
Okay.
Dave. Sorry. Yep.
That's all right. Gave them a preview. Yeah. So of course, Cato offers an SD-WAN device, the Cato socket. It comes in two models. The X1500, which is on the left side of your screen, and the X1700, which is on the right side of your screen. The X1500 is our base appliance, single power supply, and hard drive, supports up to 500 megs of encrypted or unencrypted throughput, doesn't matter to Cato. The X1700 is our fault tolerant model, redundant power supplies, redundant hard drives, and reaches 3 gigs of encrypted and unencrypted traffic. Most branches will use the X1500, and either
Like this
standalone
one.
or
You mean like
dual
this one,
there
Dave?
you go.
Like this one?
Like
Yeah.
that
So
one.
I
Exactly.
like that one. I won the 1700, Dave. I wanted for our labs, right? So yeah. So yeah. Interestingly enough, we're powering our network today using the Cato X1500.
All
Now that I'm
right.
done playing Vanna White, let me turn it back to you, Dave.
And you can run that either in standalone or in dual HA config as you like. Data centers are likely to use a single or dual X1700 for even higher redundancy. And the Cato sockets, they provide the functions you would expect to see in an SD-WAN device. So they support multiple ISPs for active-active to boost your network capacity. The socket monitors those ISPs for blackouts or brownouts, and then move sessions between the last miles to maximize uptime and work around last mile issues. Packet loss problems like that might be affecting your voice, you would just duplicate the packets over multiple last mile connections to really get tremendous voice quality, even over very lossy connections. In addition, though, and the Cato socket also dynamically selects the optimum path for any given packet, and also provides quality of service. But where it's different is that the sockets are fully user aware. So our QoS isn't just done on a per application basis, but it also could be done on a per user basis. So I can prioritize Roy's voice calls over David's because we know Roy is the world's leading expert. So we want to make sure that his voice gets out. Dave's, what can we do? And the socket can also route traffic both to the Cato SASE cloud, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also to MPLS, site to site, over the internet, according to policy. And using the socket to POP optimization in conjunction with a Cato POP to POP optimization in the middle mile allows for bandwidth maximization over 20x more than MPLS and over the internet. We'll look at that a little bit more in a minute. And then finally, on the management side, this is really a zero-touch device. I mean, not only can Roy deploy it, but Dave can deploy it.
Yeah,
That's pretty,
even I can
Grandmother
deploy
it. Well,
even I can deploy. Yeah.
no, it really is. I mean, you just plug it in and the thing works. You also can manage the device through the Cato SASE Cloud Console, where you get real-time analytics as well. And then the socket and Cato SASE Cloud supports BGP route propagation to allow coexistence of Cato with your locations outside of the Cato environment. So you can get that nice incremental upgrade, incremental migration that we often do when we switch vendors. You don't need to do a forklift overnight. Poll question for you folks. Again, just take a few seconds here. We really would appreciate it. When are you looking to reconsider your SD-WAN solution? Is that immediately? Is that in 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, or 12 plus months? You can just give us the answer that you think is most appropriate for your organization. We would appreciate it. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Roy.
All right, thanks, Dave. So option A, switch to another SD-WAN vendor. We've touched that, and maybe that works for you. And in some cases, maybe you're okay with your SD-WAN vendor. Your SD-WAN's working fine. And you're like, let's just leave it be. Or maybe you have budget and resource constraints and you can't do it right now, right? Speaking of, upgrading or changing. And you need a quick solution because you have enterprise security needs, right? And you're saying, how do I do that? Well, SSE certainly can provide you security in the cloud as a service. So it's fully managed. That's great. So one of the options, or option B, is to leave the SD-WAN solution you have in place, right? Maybe just renew it, and then just bring on SSE on the top of it as your security solution to address your security needs. And it's pretty convenient because SSE is delivered from the cloud. You should be able to connect it just as is and get the benefits of security and networking. But certainly, one of the issues with going down this path is potentially two distinct vendors, right? There's going to be complexity and overhead in managing these vendors as they try to integrate the solutions. And depending on what you have in SD-WAN, you may have two different deployment and management models, right? Maybe you got DIY and as a service, maybe you've gone with carrier for one and you now are going with a vendor for the other one. So the fact that you have two different solutions from two different people, that's going to be something disappointing. That's going to be the reality when something doesn't go right. But as long as you're okay with that, or maybe you have constraints, you have no choice, this may be the path for you, potentially. Right?
Thank you. So let's take a closer look at the SSE model that Roy talked about. Roy talked about the fact that with SSE, you're liable to have one vendor for SD-WAN, one vendor for SSE. Those are two vendors, to manage. That can be quite complex. The reality is actually even more complex than that. With SSE, you're converging together, in theory, multiple products, right? So you have your CASB and secure web gateway are being used to secure traffic to the web or to SaaS applications. That's usually done with one particular kind of architecture, a proxy architecture. They proxy the connection and inspect it. But when those users start accessing resources across the WAN, whether it's in a physical data center or cloud data center, there you're using ZTNA, and ZTNA often has per application connectors, so that's a second architecture that you're having to manage. But what about traffic coming from non-users or non-HTTP protocols? To address that traffic, the enterprises generally need to maintain their legacy next generation firewalls and UTMs to secure everything. And the SSE can't see and control. So, Gartner's SSE ends up requiring multiple architectures, multiple policy engines that all have to be coordinated together and managed, and still gives you limited visibility into critical network traffic. And because it's primarily designed for internet access, global WAN traffic optimization is not in scope. So how do you overcome that? What do you do about that? Well, we thought about that, but a surprise. And what we felt was needed was a cloud security service that provides total visibility, optimization, and control of all traffic. And we call that SSE 360. SSE 360 is built to process traffic across all ports and protocols, from all sources to all destinations. And all traffic is optimized and inspected in real time for threats, sensitive data, and compliance with full enforcement of corporate policies. SSE 360 overcomes the challenges of traditional SSE. It's built on a cloud architecture and one common cloud architecture, one policy engine that covers all traffic for both security and optimization. So let's take a closer look at how that might look like in your organization. So today, if you have SD-WAN, this is obviously a simplified network, but you probably have a bunch of branches or a bunch of data centers connected together across the internet. And let's just suppose that you said, okay, well, what would that look like in a Cato model? Well, tomorrow you can come to Cato, you could buy into Cato SSE 360, keep your existing SD-WAN devices, or if they're VPN devices, we don't care as well. As long as you can establish an IPsec connection to the nearest Cato POP, then you can connect to the Cato SASE cloud. Now, today, there are more than 75 POPs worldwide servicing over customers in over 150 countries. So you probably do have a POP that's relatively close to you. All those POPs are interconnected by our global private backbone, which is built with redundant tier 1 providers. Those providers guarantee consistent and predictable latency, jitter, and packet loss. So if global traffic was your issue, if you were using global MPLS, this would be a viable replacement. We're talking about, of course, here we're talking about SSE. We're not talking about SASE, but you should know that that's there. Inside those POPs, we're running the Cato Space Engine. And the Cato Space Engine consists of two components. There's a multi-gig packet processing engine that is taking traffic in from any flow, extracts rich context about that flow, user identity, particular types of applications, other sorts of device posture, other sorts of data. And then it selects the optimum route to send that traffic, accelerates it, and then as needed decrypts the traffic selectively on a per application basis. And the second piece of that is what we've been talking about, SSE 360, right? So SSE 360 is the real-time policy enforcement portion of the Cato Space Engine. And with that, you get firewalls as service and secure web gateway, as we talked about, just to restrict access to your applications, whether in resources, whether on the WAN or out on the internet. You have IPS and next generation anti-malware to protect you against network-based threats. ZTNA, CASB, and DLP as well. And all of that are converged together into a single architecture. Of course, today's enterprises, like yourselves probably, have more than just sites. You probably also have users working from home. The nice thing about Cato is that you can connect your users very easily into and protect them the same way you do with your locations. Whether you issue them a Cato client that runs on their tablet or on their laptop, or you give them a clientless connection through a browser, they can get access to their applications as necessary with all the same security policies being enforced as you would if they were accessing resources from your sites. And then, what about the cloud? Well, it happens to be that Cato POPs are located in the same physical data centers as Azure and AWS. So the jump from Cato to Azure AWS is just a jump across the local area network. And effectively, that gives you optimized traffic, not just across the Cato backbone, but also all the way into the cloud data center. And then finally, to connect SaaS applications, it's just a changing of a network rule. We spot the traffic that is destined for a particular SaaS instance, and we can drop it right off at the POP that's located at the doorstep to your cloud instance. All of which can be managed through a single console. Cato gives you full visibility control, really through a single pane of glass. There really is a single pane of glass. Through a single management console, you can manage both your network infrastructure and your complete security infrastructure. You can do that yourself. You can outsource it to one of Cato or one of its providers or one of its partners, or you can do a co-management model where you split that as well. So that's Cato SSE. Over to you, Roy.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave, for the comprehensive discussion of the Cato SSE solution. Now, so obviously, keep your SD-WAN, add SSE, certainly an option. But if that doesn't work, there may be situations where you are willing to take the pain of upgrading, of saying, I want a better SD-WAN, I also want a SSE, and I'm going to onboard both at the same time. You're like, wait a minute, why would you do that? That's pain, right? Clearly, because you're changing two things at the same time. There may be situations where, and we've talked to some enterprises where that is a necessity, right? And so it's possible that through their initial SD-WAN deployment, they've realized that there is only one SD-WAN vendor that can fulfill their unique needs, or the SD-WAN vendor has committed to adding a particular capability just for them, and so they don't have a choice. But that SD-WAN vendor doesn't have an SSE or an adequate SSE features, and so they say, we need that too. And so what you're going to do is you're going to switch your SD-WAN and add SSE simultaneously, right? And there are some IT departments where there's a mandate, because they've decided to contract with this particular solution provider, that you have to use the SD-WAN. So there are situations where that happens. It does happen. And so I don't have to explain the details here in terms of the pitfalls. I mean, I think, if you're in that situation, you don't really have much choice. You have to go ahead with it. But hopefully you find a good SSE solution in that situation. But, you're managing two vendors and you're trying to do two things at the same time. It is an effort. There's no doubt about that, right? So, but anyway, over to you, Dave. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So, we've seen how with Cato, if you just want Cato SD-WAN because you're sticking with your existing firewall vendor or your security vendor, and all you want is an SD-WAN solution, we've seen that already, right? Mm-hmm. And we've seen that if you have an SD-WAN solution and all you want is SSE, well, we've seen that as well, right? You can buy Cato SSE 360, run it with any SD-WAN provider. But Cato is also future-proof, meaning if you want the full enchilada, if you want to go with SASE today, the migration from SSE 360 to a full SASE deployment is seamless and simple. It's just a matter of replacing your existing SD-WAN devices or next-generation firewalls with the Cato socket, Edge SD-WAN, and you're good to go. So you can start with SSE 360 if that's what you want. Keep your existing investment in your existing SD-WAN devices. And when you're ready, drop in Cato sockets incrementally and gain all the benefits that SASE has to offer.
Excellent. And so, I think as Dave was saying, I guess you can have peanut butter or you can have jelly, whichever way it is. And at the end, you can
or peanut butter and jelly, Roy.
And jelly. That's exactly, which is what we're going to talk about here, which is buying that sandwich, going full in, right? So maybe it's time. And you say, hey, look, SD-WAN has been great, but it is time. And you're going to do this switch and do it. And in terms of a future-proof, it's never really full future-proof, but future-ready, future-better, future whatever it is, right? Put yourself in a better place for that. And go whole hog, full-stack SASE, including SD-WAN in there. And so when you have the ability to make that joint decision, back to the poll question that Dave asked earlier, maybe you're good friends and the security team agrees with you. Maybe on the security side, the networking
I was going to say, maybe good friends
in
and the networking team agree with you.
Exactly. So you say, hey, let's do it. Or maybe you're one and the same because the CIO has now modified the organization to even converge you. And you say, let's make a joint decision into the converged stack. Let's just make that one step. And so it is, you can do it. And still, maybe your two teams are great friends. Doesn't mean that there's no stress as you upgrade. That's the reality.
Right.
But the good news is that once you do that, then you're in great shape, at least for the foreseeable future. And then you now have a converged solution that does both your networking and security from the cloud, right? So you've made that transition. But obviously here, you got to make the right choice. You need to make sure that whatever SASE vendor you pick has the appropriate strength in the networking side to meet all the needs that you had before and will have in the near future. And the SASE security stack is a complete stack and meets all your needs, again, now and in the foreseeable future. and then it comes in together, under one context, right? One solution. And so I think that's the key here to making it successful. And we've seen some organizations now take this step. In fact, it's I would say there's momentum behind this, and to the extent that you can make this choice is certainly, I think, probably one of the better choices, out of the four.
So, Cato, Roy, you gave me the idea for a new verb, I guess. It's future-proof-er, right? We're gonna future-proof-er, because you can't future-proof, right? As you said,
Right, exactly.
Cato certainly future-proof-ers your network, and we can sort of look at WAN transformation as a journey in which we're going to future-proof-er your network. And here's what that could look like today. So today, you just start out and you start with SD-WAN, right? Because you need more bandwidth, a lower cost, MPLS probably isn't working for you. And that's fine. So you start with SD-WAN, and then tomorrow, well, maybe you've opened up some global locations, so you need to now get predictable global performance. If you've ever tried doing that over the internet, over the long haul, over the internet core, you know how unpredictable the internet is. So now you have to go out and buy a global backbone. But wait a minute, you need to sort of like secure, right, the traffic coming out of the branch for secure direct internet access. So you go out and as we've been talking about here, you go out and buy an SSE solution or next generation firewall solution. And then you have yet another solution to that. Wait, we're not done yet though. Perhaps you want to enable cloud migration. So you need cloud acceleration. Or, COVID hits, right? The next COVID. And now all of a sudden you need to issue mobile VPN clients to all your users and get that out very quickly. And somehow you're going to need to find a way to manage all of that, right? So a SASE platform converges all those capabilities you need today and tomorrow, right? And by contrast, a non-SASE approach forces you to find, evaluate, buy, integrate, and manage multiple products to cover each requirement. You think how much time you'll save by not doing all that work each time and just flipping a switch when you're ready. There's something else that I want to try to underscore here. Folks, I don't have a slide for this, so you'll have to bear with me. But because Cato converges all these capabilities together, there's a lot of common technology that's being used. There's a common policy engine, common management framework, a common packet processing engine. It goes on, which also allows innovation to happen very, very quickly. Cato this year introduced CASB and DLP in record time, something that most companies would take far longer, years to develop. And we've been able to do that and iterate and create new capabilities precisely because we're reusing the components that already exist within the Cato platform. So as new needs emerge, Cato will be there and we will address them. So while we can't guarantee you that today we are completely future-proofing you against a Mars invasion, for example, but I guarantee you if there's a networking component to a Mars invasion, Cato will be there tomorrow with your Mars Invader Protector solution suite. And we will build that very quickly because we'll be able to tap into the Cato SASE platform. That's not a product announcement, by the way. Just want to make sure that that's clear. Okay, I think this is our last poll question for you folks. So it's an easy one. Would you like a free personalized demo of Cato? Yes, no, maybe later. If you can answer that, and you won't have to listen to Dave rattling into your ear as you take that demo, or Roy for that matter.
Yeah, you should have A and B. It's like, would you like Dave to come to your house and demo Cato? Maybe not, right?
Okay, all right. That would be a good way to kill your sales, but fine.
We package Dave with every socket. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Over to you, Roy.
Yeah, so obviously you have choices, which is a good thing, but you have choices, which is a complicated thing. So what do you do, right? So your path forward, I think, is number one, you need to understand what your needs are. Not just immediately, but look out a little ahead, right? So maybe not all the way in the future, but the near future, right? So near future proof, how's that? Anyway, but take a look at that and also look at your resources in your budget because those obviously are constraints, right? Look at the four options, right? Eliminate the ones that obviously are not choices for you. Or maybe there's one choice is made for you. You don't have a choice, right? That's okay too. But then the next one is talk to trusted partners, reevaluate the subset of vendors that fit your options, right? I mean, obviously you're welcome to like all the reports out there and the MQs or the whatever queues, right? And figure that out. But I would say just talk to the vendors, right? There are a couple of prominent ones out there in the field. I'm not going to name names, but certainly I'm sitting here with someone. But regardless, I mean, talk to your partners, reevaluate the subset of vendors that fit your options, and see what's right for you, because again, it's got to work for you, and you're not going to do this every 6 months. You can't, right? So it's going to last a couple of years. This decision, you want to make the right one. And so the key thing is, this is a major infrastructure upgrade for any enterprise, mid, large, even small, right? And it's very important to make an informed decision. And so I'd suggest take a look, see what's available in the market, right? And see if they fit your needs. And it's not that hard to evaluate these things, really. I mean, some of them have software clients you can even try out right away, right? I mean, some of them are happy to ship you a socket for your labs to try out. I know that, right? Some of them will do it, and it's worth making that choice very carefully. And so hopefully, the conversation here has helped you in terms of that decision. And I'll turn it back to Dave to wrap up.
Well, Roy, if folks have questions for you, if they want to get in touch with you, maybe have you help them with their selection process, I imagine you folks do that sort of thing. What would be the best way to get hold of you?
Yeah, so if you just go to our website and fill in the contact form, so AvidThink, that's AvidThink.com, or you can email research@avidthink.com, and we'll be happy to have a conversation with you about this.
Okay. So I know we've had you folks here for a while. Wow, I've got a bunch of questions coming in. We'll get through some of them, but the ones that we don't address, of course, we will come back to you afterwards. So by all means, keep on filing those questions, and we will follow up with you after the webinar. Roy, I saw on the internet that there are more than 20 different SASE vendors. How do I know if a solution is actually SASE?
Yeah, so it is going to be a little tricky, and some of them, I would say that there's two parts to it, right? The first is take your list of what's SASE, and you go to Gartner and download the report, or you go to any of the other analysts, and we have our favorite subset of SASE as well that we think are important based on conversations with enterprises and service providers. So take a look at the subset, determine that those checkboxes are important to your needs, and then evaluate them against what the vendor provides. I think that's the first step. And then the second step is to look at the momentum of the SASE uptake of the solutions out there, and to see if the momentum's strong, because that usually indicates something. The one thing you don't want to do is, there are some legacy vendors out there that came from a different space, security space or even networking space, that are using the word SASE. Right. I would ask you to take a strong look and to make sure that they are in fact SASE and they do what they say. The other element I think is important is to look at the architecture of the solution. I think, as Dave pointed out, right, there are some architectures out there that are more amenable to fast innovation, that are built right to begin with, and to the extent that you believe that's important to you in terms of fast response, or some agility in your vendor solutions, then you want to take a look at that architecturally and say, is this the right foundation for me to be building on, or not, right? I think that's one way to look at it. That's what I would do for my own SASE needs, right? So hopefully that's something that you do as well.
It's interesting. There's another question that came in that says, I noticed that Cato calls itself the single vendor SASE. What difference does it make if SASE is provided by one vendor or multiple vendors? And I think what Roy has, I think you've addressed this question very clearly, that in the end of the day, the innovation of SASE is that it's convergence of security and networking into the cloud, right? So it's those three pieces. And the reason why that's so critical is because the reason why we in IT had a problem for years, because we've had this multiplicity of solutions that are out there that we've then had to integrate together somehow. We haven't really done such a great job at it, or if we had, the manpower that was required was so great that many IT organizations wasn't able to afford it. And that complexity engendered the kinds of security problems that we have today, the kinds of, the agility limitations that we have today. All sorts of problems came about precisely because of the heterogeneity and the power of a single vendor SASE solution is that everything really is converged together into a single architecture, which makes it remarkably simple to deploy and to manage. When you get to Cato, you will get a very clear timeline, the event screen, which Roy probably has seen, which shows you all of your security and networking events laid out for you very easily for you to then parse. So it makes troubleshooting much, much easier. You can clearly see what's happened and when it happened. And that's just one example of the benefits of convergence. So that's a kind of a long way of answering that question. And we have time for one more question, Roy. This person is asking, why is SD-WAN and SSE preferable to my existing SD-WAN and security appliances?
Yeah.
So I guess it really comes down to why swap out security appliances for SSE.
Yeah, and what we're seeing, obviously, that's my opinion in there, but certainly in terms of the enterprises that we've spoken with, and in terms of why they've gone the SSE route, is in many cases what they're seeing is there's a lot of there's two elements. One is this age of the existing security appliances and the innovation that doesn't come with age, unfortunately. So we're seeing this lack of innovation in some of the security appliances. The second one is management complexity. I think Dave just talked about it, right? Which is that one screen, even just for security alone on the SSE portion of it, is helpful to see everything in one place, set up one set of policies, and just have it execute. And get innovation that comes from a new generation of solutions that builds off the cloud. Now there is one final thing, and so I'll talk about in a second. The final thing is there is a performance element to it, which is that many of the next generation, the new generation SSEs, touch that packet once, right? And that this is technical, right? But fundamentally, it touches the packet once. It opens it up and touches it once. And what does that buy for you? It buys you, from a user perspective, a reduction in latency, right? It buys you easy troubleshooting because something goes wrong. That's one place to look, right? And it also buys on the vendor side, which translates hopefully the benefits to you. It buys the vendor efficiency because it touches the packet once. And so at some point that benefit accrues to you as a user because less resources are used to process that packet. And so benefit from a performance standpoint, benefit from a use of resources and power standpoint. And maybe we could argue that that's more sustainable in the long term. Well, no, why touch a packet 10 times? And I see this all the time. I mean, historically, let's decrypt the packet. All right, inspect it. Let's re-encrypt it and put it in a wire. The next appliance picks it up and says, let's decrypt the packet. Let's look at it again.
Right.
And I'm like, why are we doing that?
That's right.
Right. That's a cost to doing that. And so I think it's worth taking a look and rethinking this. And sometimes people argue, well, we have a string of pearls argument, best of breed, chained together. But I think, sure, but there is a way of redoing best of breed, because if you can take the expertise that came along with building each of those best of breed and put them into one engine, right? You have best of breed. It's just that you took a different architecture approach to it. So I think, we have conversations with enterprises all the time, and there's all these different arguments. But I think in the longer term, we're at a stage where we know enough about all these edge solutions that we should be able to do better. Right?
And a string of pearls is no good to you if the string is broken.
Yeah.
Pearls may be beautiful, but if there's no string there, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
folks. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We do appreciate it. And thank you, Roy, for being so informative. And it's great to chat with you again.
It's always a pleasure.
Until next time, folks, have a great day now. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.